You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.
Hello, my name is Richard Moore. I'm with Orla Chennaoui.
Hello, Richard.
Hello, Orla.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, yeah. 2018.
God. Oh, come on. A bit more excitement about that. It's a wonderful year ahead.
I like the new year.
We've survived another year. That's the way to look at it.
Yeah.
We're here to take on a new one.
Year 3 of the Cycling Podcast Féminin. Big year for us. We're going to be bigger and better and more frequent, I hope, this year. That is the plan. We're working on that. Thank you very much for all your feedback to last month's episode. All gratefully received. We've got some competition winners. I will announce them later in the episode. So stay tuned for that. But this one, to kick off the new year, is a little bit different. We're going to play just a couple of long interviews with two very interesting characters. We're calling this episode I Love the 1980s. That's some reference there to sort of that gives away our age a little bit, doesn't it, Orla? But
well, you can still have like this. Lots of people.
Well, you can, but I think the 1980s. We're both.
But there's no point in denying it.
We're kind of children of the 80s.
We are,
aren't we?
yeah.
And so the 80s were when I got into cycling, and one of the names that I remember when I first got into cycling, reading Cycling Weekly and so on, was Mandy Jones, who was the World Road Race champion in 1982 when the World Road Race Championships were the last time they were in Britain, Goodwood in Leicester. They're coming back, of course, next year, 2019, to Yorkshire. But Mandy Jones won that race, and that was pretty phenomenal. She wasn't the first British rider to be a World Road Race champion, but it was pretty incredible.
First I remember,
yeah, and it was exactly the time where I was starting to become aware of cycling. And she was one of the names, one of the people that you read about in Cycling Weekly. And I'd always wondered what happened to her, because she just seemed to me to have vanished a bit. She wasn't still involved as far as I knew. However, a couple of years ago I met her, or 18 months ago I met her at the Dave Rayner dinner in Leeds. I was introduced to her and arranged to go and, got her number and arranged to go and interview her in Oldham, where she now lives and works, running a bike shop with her husband. And I went to see her on a very rainy, cold day in Oldham. We sat and chatted, and she was the most down-to-earth, very unassuming of women, but an absolutely fascinating story. And you look at the sort of opportunities there are now for kids and girls to get into sport. It's still not necessarily easy, but the hurdles she had to clamber over back then, quite remarkable, really. It's a great story, so we're going to hear it in some length. But before we hear from Mandy Jones, we're going to hear from another sort of 80s pioneer, somebody you spoke to, Orla.
Yes, Robin Morton, who was the first woman in the history of cycling, and I think still the only to own and manage a men's professional team. In 1984, her team, sponsored by Gianni Motta, became the first American team to enter a Grand Tour. She took them to the Giro d'Italia. Can you imagine? I mean, we had a little clip of her earlier last year on the Cycling Podcast Féminin. But we saved the whole interview because we wanted to run the whole thing because it's so wonderful. But can you imagine being a woman at the Giro d'Italia in 1984? I was a woman at the Giro d'Italia in the noughties. And even then, not even the noughties, post-noughties, I don't know what we call the next decade. But even then, it is such a throwback to old school European racing where women are there for a certain reason generally, and it's certainly not to tell the men what to do. So she was such a pioneer for the women's sport. And even there's a story that she tells me about where the men's teams all had to have a meeting. The men's teams, just the teams. The managers all had a meeting before the start of the Giro d'Italia to decide, to take a vote as to whether or not she should be allowed to be in one of the race cars, which is just phenomenal. But yeah, so her experience of men's cycling and in cycling in general is, it's a wonderful perspective. So she very kindly gave me some of her time from her home in the States, and we had a little chat. So here is Robin Morton. Robin, I wanted to talk to you about your time as a DS back in the 80s. How do you remember that time? Fondly?
Oh, definitely fondly. I think it was an experience that I wasn't totally prepared for, and probably if I had been maybe older and more experienced, I may not have done it, but definitely I look back on it fondly. I really went into it having no prior experience managing a team, especially a men's team. I didn't come at it from a lot of other directors where they were previously athletes or had been involved in the sport, maybe even in some coaching capacity. So for me, it was just a little bit, kind of going into it not with my eyes wide open, the other way around. And I wasn't totally prepared for some of the things that would happen, both financially and, in different ways. I mean, it was a great experience. It was a learning experience, and I wouldn't change it for anything, but definitely I was not prepared.
So why did you go into it then, Robin? What brought you to that line of work?
Well, my husband had raced as an amateur with a local club. It was a pretty, kind of storied, historic club in the area. It was called the Pennsylvania Bike Club. And he had raced, and I got involved with the club, both on the sponsorship level and helping them put on their races, their club events. And through the bike club, I met, who was a professional then, John Eustace. And he had just come back from racing in Europe and, started talking about how he wanted to put an American team together to race in Europe. And again, not really knowing what I was getting myself in for. It was one of those things like, oh, yeah, well, okay, I'm game. This sounds like it could be really great. And so kind of led me off into a totally different career path, one that I would have never anticipated getting involved in. But it seemed like an adventure at the time.
So listen to you speak, Robin, it sounds like you maybe had a bit of a baptism of fire. Can you give us some of the stories from that time that made you realise that maybe you'd gone into it with your eyes wide shut?
Well, we went from, we organised the team here. It was composed of American pros, free agents at the time, which we had a lot more of. I don't even think that you can do that now. Free agent, American and European pros. And we had secured sponsorship from Gianni Motta. He was an ex-professional, had won the Giro, just about every classic in Italy, was third in the Tour de France. And he was exporting bikes to America and wanted to get an American team into the Giro. So I went from organizing this team in the U.S. and doing domestic racing to going to Italy and racing the Giro. And so I was the only woman at that point, in an entourage of a couple hundred men. They didn't even have women soigneurs yet. 7-Eleven was the first one to have that, and they hadn't even kind of embarked on their European campaign. So when I got to Italy and, found myself in my late 20s in the middle of this sea of masculinity, they actually, we got there and the directors had to vote as to whether or not I was even allowed to be in the caravan. I don't know what I would have done if they said no. I wasn't prepared to go home, but they actually had to take a vote in the managers' meeting as to whether or not I could even be there.
Who brought that up? Who decided that they would have to vote? I mean, it sounds so antiquated now already.
Well, I think, I don't even know if it was a UCI regulation, but I think it was something that they had never experienced before. And I cannot actually recall. I don't know if it was the president of the jury of the UCI, if it was Vincenzo Turiani, who at that point was the director of the Giro. But yeah, they had to take a vote, like actually a raise your hand, yes or no, can she be here? Did you find out whether the vote was unanimous or were there any objectors? If I recall, I think it was unanimous. Gianni Motta probably paid everyone off. No, I'm kidding. But because it was a great PR vehicle for him and for the team to have me there. So I'm not sure why they did it, but yeah, they did have to take a vote. And then we celebrated with a glass of champagne, so it was very Italian. What was it like being the only woman at the Giro d'Italia? I've covered it myself a few times, and even now, let's say there are a few cultural differences in Italy whereby, well, by some standards it would appear a little bit sexist, but I put a lot of that down to culture, and that's today. Back in the early 80s, it must have been another level. Well, I will say that, they were, the riders and the directors were pretty respectful. At the same time, I was a young woman and it was a whole different experience for them. And it was very old world. I mean, they would not let me sit or eat with the riders. They made me sit at a separate table with the support personnel, and I didn't really speak Italian. So for me, that was just like, well, okay, I'm in the car all day. I'm not speaking English. I have to sit here, and the riders wanted me there. So we kind of breached protocol, and that was a big deal because I would eat dinner with the riders at night versus the team personnel and so forth. And, that was kind of scandalous. But yeah, it was a different experience. I can remember at one point, in the morning before the stage start, Rancilio, who was an espresso machine and espresso maker, they had their trailer that came there, and all of the team captains would go in there every morning before the start of the stages to kind of just sit around and, shoot the breeze and have an espresso before the start. And so one morning, they had invited me in there and said, well, you're kind of one of the guys now, and we want you to come in and sit down and have an espresso with us. So I went in there, and it was like Moser and Vincentini and Fignon and, Roger de Vlaminck and all these riders that I was really in awe of. And so we're sitting there, and they said, well, now we think you're like one of the guys, and we have something that we want to give you. And I'm thinking, okay, this is great. It's going to be like a signed Maglia Rosa or some kind of Giro memorabilia. And they came out with a tray of vegetables in the shape of male genitalia and presented me with eggplants and all kinds of weird things. So yeah, but they did have a photographer there, so it was totally a setup.
I read an interesting story as well about a particular haircut that you were given, I guess. Tell me about that.
So I went, I had long hair, and I guess that was something too that, you get to be, this was back in the 80s, get to be over a certain age and you're married and you don't really wear your hair that way anymore. And so one day someone said, we're going to take you to this stylist and, you can get your hair cut and whatever. So I'm thinking, okay, I've been here for a while, get my hair cut and blown out, I'll look great. So they took me in there, and my hair was down in the middle of my back, and literally I looked like David Bowie when I came out. It was horrible, really horrible, yeah.
David Bowie, that's a look on a woman. In terms of actually the day-to-day job of being a DS, how did you find that? Because there's so much to that, and as you say, you had little to no experience. What was that like?
Well, I will say it was somewhat different in Italy than in the States. I mean, I did manage a team for probably 8 years, and in the States it was much more of the director sportif role. In Italy, it was more of the general manager, and I handled a lot of the business, whereas Gianni Motta acted really as the DS. I mean, I was in the car with him, and I dealt with a lot of the rider issues, but in terms of the strategy, the racing strategy for the Giro, that was actually him. I would say at that point I was more of the general manager of the team.
And what was that experience like then? I mean, you had brought the first ever American team to the Giro d'Italia. That in itself was blazing a trail, really, wasn't it?
It was an experience for sure. As I said, I didn't have a lot to base it on. I had no previous racing experience. I had been to Europe once and experienced a number of races and the World Championships and whatever. So, it was a lot of it was just learning by making mistakes. There weren't any other teams. 7-Eleven came along in 1984. 1983, there weren't a lot of other teams to be able to learn from or to sort of, follow their lead. So it was really trial and error, I have to say. It was a small budget team, so we really ran things sort of by the seat of our pants. We were lucky for the first few years that we had decent sponsors. The first year it was Gianni Motta. The next year we did the Vuelta and had a different sponsor with Xerox that was in Europe and Benotto. And then for a few years following that, I worked with Fanini and some teams in Italy. So
when you finished that first Giro d'Italia, did you think to yourself, yep, I've been bitten by the bug, this is fantastic? Or did you think, well, that was wonderful to survive it, maybe I'll do something else now?
Well, halfway through the Giro, I mean, it was fraught with issues. I mean, there were issues between myself and the other team management because I was very strong-willed and wasn't willing to just sort of sit back and let them take over the team. So there was that issue. There were some money issues with the sponsors. So halfway through the Giro, I was actually ready to pack it in. I was, planning on coming back. I was going to just turn the team over to Gianni Motta and the rest of the management of the team. And my husband had come over. I had been gone for a few months at that point, and my husband had come over to visit. And he said to me, look, if you decide that you're going to pack it in, that's fine. We can leave tomorrow. But if you come back, you're never going to be able to do this again. This is like a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And so I decided to stay, and it was very difficult. But once I think I got through that point, then there was no turning back. And I've been doing it now for 25 years.
Did you feel like you were blazing a trail back then? Did you feel like a pioneer of sorts?
No, I didn't even think of it like that. And I think that's probably why I did it. Like, I did not think that it was going to be sort of viewed as such a monumental thing. Like, okay, well, I mean, that's how my parents brought me up. I come up from just a family of women, and my parents were like, well, you can do anything you wanted to do. There are no restrictions. And so once I became involved with John Eustace, again, he became my partner, and this was his idea. And he didn't say, well, you're a woman, and I don't think that, this would work. I just felt like it wasn't an issue. I mean, I got over there and it was, hey, why does everybody think this is so weird? I mean, I don't have a problem with it. But yeah, so no, I did not feel that I was a trailblazer. It was just something that I set about to do. I wanted to do it, and I was determined to make it happen.
Are you proud now, though, nonetheless, looking back and realising that you did forge a path to a certain extent for women in cycling?
I feel like I accomplished a lot. I don't know if I forged a path. I don't know how many people have actually followed, my crazy idea. I think that women's cycling hasn't actually come far enough. I'm surprised that there aren't more women involved on the men's side of the sport. There are women, physical therapists and women trainers, but there are really no women, with the exception of Rachel Heel, and that isn't a full-time job for her on the men's side. But with the exception of Rachel, I really don't know anybody else that is directing a men's professional team. So in that regard, I think women's racing, in terms of the level of competition and the number of teams, and with the Women's World Tour, I mean, I think that's fabulous and it's come a long way, but I still think that women haven't made enough inroads on the men's side of the sport.
Why do you think that is?
I just think it's very old world. It's still a very chauvinistic sport. I mean, you look at any major league sports, even in terms of the commentating or the announcing, and in the U.S., there really aren't many women that are involved. There are a few women trainers. There's no women coaches of any major league teams. There's a few announcers, commentators on a channel like ESPN, and they're kind of relegated to interviews occasionally, post-event locker room kind of banter and things like that. So, sports is still a very chauvinistic, male-dominated. The only way that women would get hired to actually run a men's team is if a woman owned the team.
Like you did.
Right. Well, with the exception, I will say, of United Healthcare. Rachel is the only one that I can think of that her director, that her general manager and the team actually totally supports that endeavor.
Do you think, from the sports side of things, that we need more female DSs in the men's and the women's side of the sport? Does it make a big difference?
I think that if there are qualified women, they should be able to work with whatever team they want or that accepts them. But they should be in the mix to be hired for those roles. I don't think that the gender part of it should matter. It's a level of experience and intelligence and management skills. And I think that if you're a good director and can manage and direct a team of women, you can do that with a team of men. And vice versa, because look at all the men directors that manage women's teams. Well, there shouldn't be a difference.
Is there anything you think in the female makeup, psychology, if you like, that would give them an advantage, really, as a DS over men? Is there anything about women that they can bring that men can't necessarily offer?
I think women tend to be more consensus builders, and I think that that's important. Often the directors, I find, are very autocratic, and I think that the teams now, the riders want to have more say into certain aspects, not necessarily the selection of the events or who is selected to be at a specific event, but I think that in general, the riders have a bigger say in what goes on with the teams now than they used to. It's not such a dictatorial kind of environment, and I think that women are generally better consensus builders than men.
So what would you say is your fondest memory, Robin, of your time working as a DS?
I think there were a few things. One, when we were involved in Italy and when we rode the Giro, that all of the Americans finished the Giro under some kind of odd and adverse conditions, and so they all finished. And then in terms of in the U.S., there was a race in Philadelphia, had been a men's, what was then the World Cup, and a team that I managed won that. So they were kind of two highlights. What
about the lowlights, dare I ask? If there was anything that, if you had visualised in isolation before you'd become a DS and you knew it was going to happen to you, that maybe you might have thought, I might not do this after all?
I think in terms of the racing aspect of it, no. But in terms of actually putting the team together and owning the team, in the beginning it was really financially burdensome and taxing for myself and my husband, because once we made commitments, even when sponsorship had fallen through, we felt that we were obligated to meet those commitments. So financially, it was really, the first few years were really terrifically difficult to keep the team going. Obviously, without the support of my husband, he had like a regular corporate job. Without the support of my husband, the endeavor would have been over a lot sooner.
And you're glad you did it in the end?
Oh, yeah. I am glad. I wouldn't have changed anything. Every experience, even the bad ones, contributes to kind of what you become and who you are as a person. And cycling really opened a lot of doors for me. I think it's made me a much stronger person and able to deal with a lot of adversities and a lot of problems and variables and do things on the fly. I transitioned from working with the teams to event production, and I've been doing that now for a long time, so I think it's really provided me with a lot of opportunities that I would have anticipated.
The Cycling Podcast Féminin is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport, fueled by science.
Thank you very much to Science and Sport for sponsoring the Cycling Podcast Féminin again this year. You can still get 20% off all your Science and Sport products with the code CPAUG20. That will change at some point, but it still works just now. If you enter that code at the checkout at scienceandsport.com, you will get 20% off. We heard before the break from Orla in conversation with the remarkable Robin Morton, and now we're going to hear from another remarkable woman, Mandy Bishop, who 36 years ago, as Mandy Jones, became the World Road Race champion at the tender age of just 20, an astonishing achievement. These days, she's married to Nigel Bishop, who himself is a former professional rider, and he served us cups of tea when we met in the bike shop that the couple run in Oldham, just outside Manchester. Here she is, Mandy Jones. So Mandy, we're here in Oldham in your bike shop. How long have you had this place?
We've had this place about 6 years. Yeah, the mail order side. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I met you at the Dave Rayner dinner briefly,
you did.
And it was one of those moments where it's such a familiar name, because I got into cycling in the 80s and you were one of the names, and there weren't many in British cycling who were performing on an international stage.
No.
Tell me how you, right at the beginning, how did you get into cycling?
My parents were cyclists, as simple as that really, but I've got a younger sister, Carol, who's 5 years younger than me, So when we were little, they packed in cycling. And then when we actually moved to Rochdale, and I would have been 10, they joined the local cycling club, which was the West Pennine, and got Carol and I bikes. I don't think you'd really call mine a bike. I was on a rally shopper, which my mother used to use during the week for her insurance round. But I think Dad, obviously, they weren't loaded, didn't want to spend loads of money on a bike for me because I was still growing as well, and didn't know if I'd like it. But we started off doing little tours and, youth hostel weekends and things like that. And then he took me down to a bike shop in Manchester and bought me a Wes Mason frame. I remember bringing all the bits home and us building it up together.
What age were you then?
I would have been about 13.
Was racing...
Fixed wheel.
Was racing something that interested you then, or...?
No, it didn't interest me. Didn't even cross my mind at the time. My dad he used to time trial when he was riding previously, but was more of a distance man, so it was like the 112s. But he never rode any road races. They were club cyclists, my parents, really. And it was my dad who encouraged me, having said that, to start. And I just started doing things like the local 10-mile club, the club night on a Wednesday night, 10-mile time trial kind of thing. And just gradually started doing time trial. And again, racing was different, wasn't it? There wasn't as much on. So at weekends, if it was a time trial, I'd do a 10 miles, for instance, and I think eventually I did a 25, probably the medium gear 25 on Cheshire or something like that. But there was I didn't do any road racing, and there was, no circuit racing and all that. I didn't start road racing until I was 16.
So were there many other girls racing in those sorts of races?
No, not really. And I suppose when I started racing, road racing, I bet if there were 20 ladies racing.
Throughout the whole country, or...?
In road races, yeah. I don't remember there being that many. Probably 30, 40. I mean, gradually as time went on, it did get more and better, and you did get bigger fields. And of course, the thing was, we had no category as ladies, did we? Which is a good job, because otherwise the fields would have been very small. But all categories rode in the same race. So right from your elites, so I was riding, there was like the Swinton sisters and Pauline Cave and Joy Potts and so on, and they were there as I was coming into it already.
Obviously Beryl Burton had been a great champion, but were there any other female riders, role models, I suppose, people who you could look at and be inspired by?
It might sound really awful, this, but that's not what kind of thing inspires me. I don't know why. I'm just competitive and wanted to win, and it didn't matter to me who they were. I know it sounds really awful, but even Beryl, who I admire, fantastically, all I saw is that I can do that. I can do that, you know what I mean? It wasn't not a conscious thing either. It wasn't a conscious thing, it was just there at the back of my mind. She was just a human being? She was just somebody
2 arms,
to beat.
2 legs. Yeah.
Yes.
Did the time trials, the 10-mile time trials and so on, did you must have beaten a few of the boys as well, did you?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, one of the competitions I used to have was Julie Earnshaw. Of course, she was local to me as well in Shaw, and Julie and I used to battle out because we were the same age. Like in the junior 10, she beat me, and things like that. I think we got the junior 25, she beat me, and the junior 10, we actually got joint 10 mile. And it was, again, only gradually. Because although I rode the bike at weekends, I didn't really start training until I was late 17, It made a massive difference. It's amazing what riding your bike a bit more regularly does for you. And actually started training, and then I started training with Ian Greenhalgh, and I was going out all the time training. And that was the big difference, because of course everybody worked, didn't they? We're all amateurs. They worked, they rode at night if they could, raced at weekends, and I went from doing it part-time to just doing it full-time. And effectively, even though I was an amateur, I trained like a pro. I've trained with Ian every day, and he was riding in the pro ranks.
How did you do that? Okay. Were you working or studying, or...?
No, I'd finished college, and basically the government sponsored me. It's one way of putting it.
You were unemployed, on the dole. There are a lot of riders in the 80s rode like that.
And my parents supported me. At the end of the day, they supported me by taking me to events. My dad paid for entry fees and things like that. And without them, I would have not been able to get anywhere. It was a massive amount of support. My dad was quite happy for me to ride full time. And that was the big difference, because like Julie, who really was, because she's my age as well, Julie was a fantastic rider, but Julie worked as well as tried to race. And obviously these days they don't do that, do they? They train full time, and it makes a big difference. Massive difference.
There wouldn't have been much of a career path for a female rider in those days. So what was driving you? What were you ambitious? Did you have targets?
I wanted to win the Worlds.
Really? You'd set your heart on that?
Well, funnily enough, again, it's that subconscious thing, isn't it? When I was at school doing my O-levels, I remember one of the teachers saying to me, she got annoyed with me because she said, oh, you're not working hard enough. And she said something to me about, she knew I was a cyclist because she lived at the end of our street. And she said, you're spending too much time cycling. What kind of thing what are you going to do with that? And I said, I'm going to be world champion. And I walked out I think she was a bit stunned. I was stunned. I walked out the classroom and I remember thinking to myself, where did that come from? Because I hadn't consciously thought it. But obviously it was at the back of my mind. And yeah, that was when I was training with Ian, that was always the plan. 3 years, at that point in time. So it's 3 years to Goodwood, UK. We're going to aim to win the Worlds.
So it was very much an ambition.
Oh, yeah.
Was that also, saying to the teacher that, was that also a way for you to justify that your attention was elsewhere and the commitment and the time you were putting into it?
Possibly. And I knew there was no career in it. But when you're that age, you don't think about things like that, do you? At the end of the day, to me, I knew I wasn't going to go on to a professional career like a man possibly would. I just had an aim. And we hadn't even thought, and I hadn't thought, about what happens if you win? What do you do after that? It was just simply that was the goal. And that concentrated on it. And obviously the racing in between then, and then, planning what races you're going to ride and how you'll build up over the winter and things like that. I didn't consciously think about what would happen after. You
were setting your sights on Goodwood and the World Championships.
Yeah, and I think really in some ways very naive about it. I certainly was. I mean, at the end of the day, I was 20 years old. And like today, of course, they've got that support, haven't they? They even teach you how to talk to the media and so on and so forth. And we had no plans for if I won. It was almost, even though we'd planned it was a shock.
But we'll get on to winning it in a moment.
Yeah. But you just think afterwards, what do you do now?
How did you get yourself ready for that, though? I mean, can you tell me about the couple of years leading to that? What sort of races did you do, and how did you get yourself into a position where you might be in contention?
I mean, the thing I did was we trained all year round. So even in the winter was doing lots of miles, even Utah weekends, but we'd do regular Sunday runs of like 120 mile. In the winter, not probably much in the week because I'd work. I actually used to work over the winter, get a job over the winter. And other than that, it was ladies' road races. So you'd plan the calendar around the national championships, and I used to ride the time trials and the road race and the pursuit. So we just rode everything. And then we used to get usually an invite May-ish to go and race abroad, which was usually France or Belgium. But we only really got them in the early season like that. There was nothing in the middle of the season. And so other than that, I'd probably ride a time trial on a Saturday, I'd ride a road race on a Sunday. And then obviously Leicester track, I did some training behind the motorbike usually a couple of weeks before Leicester. And a lot of it was trial and error.
So you had no way of really measuring yourself against the international competition other than those brief
in those brief
abroad.
Early ones, which were internationals, but and I obviously I did well at them, and we rode well as a team together. But they were only early on in the season, so although you could be going well early on in the season when you met them in May, you didn't know what was going to be like in September, and obviously what kind of races they had during the year. And we'd come back home and be riding, and there weren't many ladies races. Riding ladies races. So if there was no races on, I'd ride a time trial, and I'd ride out to the time trial if it was near enough. So if it was on Lancaster, if it was on Cheshire, I'd ride out, ride the event, ride home. So I always kept my mileage up because I was probably doing about 350 to 400 mile a week.
How did you get on when you raced internationally?
Internationally, I had no problem at all.
So you knew that you could compete. There was nothing to frighten you there when you came up against.
No, when I came up, no.
Did you ride the Worlds other years as well?
Yeah, I rode 80, 81 and 82 and 83. 1980 I got bronze in Solange.
In Solange, so they were always the same place.
That was a really hilly course.
Yeah.
Very hard. Because we used to ride the pursuit and the road race, so in 80 I rode the pursuit first, and I punctured because the track was wet and nearly came off my bike. That was the scariest thing in the world. And then I was riding against a French girl and I got booed, which was lovely. So I didn't do very well at that. But then I got a bronze medal on the road. Then in 81, we decided that I would ride the pursuit only. And I'd broken the world record on Leicester. And so we thought, right, we'll concentrate on that. Unfortunately, I wasn't well. It was in Prague. And I remember riding the heats, and thinking, I'm really struggling to stick with the line here. And I bombed out, did a rubbish ride. And then sort of a day later, all this cold started coming out. So I did nothing in 81. And in 82, again, same thing at Leicester. But because it was in the UK, I trained, and again, this is what I was saying about trial and error, and knowing what I know now, you wouldn't do that. But I was training behind the motorbike a couple of times a week. So I'd go out on the road, do a road ride, and then in the afternoon go out behind the motorbike. But then I'd ride behind Ian on the motorbike, and then I'd come out, he'd be doing 30 mile an hour. I'd come up at the side of him, and I had to last, say, 2 lampposts up at the side of him. And of course, gradually got faster, and would do probably 4 up and down this circuit we did. But I did it until the Wednesday before the pursuit on the Saturday. Well, I was knackered, wasn't I? I'd done something like a 3:56 in the Nationals, and I did a 4:08. And I was like, fed up.
That must have been difficult.
It was, really. Because people expected me to do well. I'd won the Nationals, I'd been going well. And I expected me. It wasn't so much for others. I expected it. And I was thinking, oh my God. And I do get nervous. I am quite a nervous person anyway. But after that, I just went, well, I don't bloody care now, kind of thing. So a week later, when it came to the road race, I was really relaxed. I thought, I've got nothing to lose. I've already made a cock up, basically, as far as I was concerned. Didn't even realise then what it was. Didn't realise it was because I trained so close to the event.
So what did you do, I mean, training-wise?
In between, I just got on my bike and potted around. Well, of course, it was like 10
probably the best,
10 days.
Best thing for you.
Yeah, because you're tapering, aren't you? Which I now understand, but didn't then. So when it came to the road race, I was flying and I was dead relaxed.
Well, tell me about it as you lined up. I mean, who did you fear? Who was the main opposition?
Canins.
Maria Canins, Italian rider. Yeah.
Jeannie Longo. We'd been riding against all these, but I'd ridden against them early on in the year, so I did know them. Because that was the other thing, because we didn't ride internationals regularly, sometimes you only saw people the first time at the World Championships, so it was a bit odd. But we got a frontline start. I did. I remember Jim Hendry holding me up and put both my feet in, and then as we set off, somebody's pedal went in my wheel to put my foot down.
And what was the course like? Obviously
suited me because it was, if it had been Ilya, it'd probably been better, but Goodwood, it's got a climb.
Yeah.
Climbs up to past Goodwood House and up to where the racing circuit is, the horse race circuit. Then it drops off a bit. Then it comes back downhill through the woods along some lanes, and actually then we did the motor racing circuit, which was the worst bit in some ways because no cover, very exposed. If you get away, they can see you. So it's it's not like you're hiding in the lanes and the trees where they can't see you. So that made
motor racing circuits are not great for bike racing, as we've discussed that before on the podcast. Tell me how the race unfolded then.
So if I can remember 30 odd years ago, first time round, one of the Dutch girls got away and I went with her, and then that wasn't going anywhere, and I just rode a very positive race. And I mean, when everything falls into place, when you're fit and you've done the training and you've done all the preparation you can, all you can do is ride the race. And I just rode it in a very positive way, and I just watching everything, and I went with this first move, and then they got caught back, and it was actually on the climb they got caught back. Then the next lap round, I was away, that was it. I'd been away with this Dutch girl, and as we were on the right hand side of the hill, we're climbing the hill, Canins and another couple of girls were chipping off on the left, and I was like gritting my teeth, and I got across onto the back of them, and that was the move that went away then. And so we carried on up the climb past the finish, because the finish was at the top hill, along, and actually when we went along the flat bit, and as we turned right, I just took off, and that's when I got away. That was on the last lap.
And was that always going to be your strategy, or
my strategy is always to get away, because I'm not a sprinter. No, I'm not a sprinter. Against other people who are climbers, I'm not so bad, but against outright sprinters, no. And because it was a hill finish, no, my ploy was always, I had to get away, because it's just so much safer from my point of view. I know I can time trial. If I can get away, out of sight, out of mind again, I can just put my head down and go.
So you got away. Were you surprised to get a gap?
I was surprised, actually, because it was on a downhill bit I got away. Because I think, again, because people, and I've had to do this in races, because I can climb, people expected me attack on a climb. And the amount of times I've tried to get on a climb and it's not worked because people chase you. And on a few events, I've actually got away downhill because everybody goes, oh, well, she's all right, we're over the top, we can stay with her now. And while they relax, I just go. And I just did the same thing as we went down this bend. I was first round, and they must have just eased up thinking, oh, we're on a downhill. And I just took off. And then didn't watch to see if there was a reaction. I'd gone.
So what was it like coming onto the motor racing circuit with the lead?
That was scary. Yeah, because usually when you're riding, your nerves have gone, haven't they? But when I came around that motor race, it's get on it first and it's going round, and of course as it's going that way I can't see, but as we get round and I can look back over my right shoulder and I can see them, and I'm thinking, my God, they don't seem that far behind. And I just had to grit my teeth and just keep going, because I thought, if I look, because I know if I'd have been in the group behind, seeing somebody in front of me like that, it's like tortoise and a hare job. I would have been after them, and I'm sure they were. So it was a case of obviously off the motor racing circuit, you're back into the trees then. And I could see some girls up ahead of me, because I was catching the Chinese girls who we'd lapped. So that was a bit of a pull for me, because I could see somebody in front. But I remember thinking, the one thing that stuck in my mind was the road surface, and the fact that it was not a nice smooth surface.
Right.
I remember thinking, why couldn't they have tarmac this and made it smooth? Because it was like, you're tired and you're trying, and you've got this juddery noise as you get feeling as you're going along. And then the climb started, and I just thought, I've just got to grit my teeth. And
it climbed up to the finish?
Yeah, so it climbs a bit, then it drags, so it's really heavy on your legs, dipped a little bit, and then it started to climb, and then you do a peel off, right? But the thing was, then I was in the crowds, and there was that many people shouting for me. It was like being lifted. It was just such a fab feeling. That's
funny, because the phenomenon of huge British crowds at events, we've seen that the last few years. Of course, Olympic Road Race, Tour of Britain, etc., Tour de France. But that crowd, were they casual spectators, or was that British cycling fans?
Most of them were British cycling people,
and they'd come from all over the country to be there. So they knew, they knew what was at stake, and they knew that a British girl was coming up to the win. So what did that feel like, getting to the line, crossing the line, world champion?
Absolutely bloody fantastic. There's no other word for it. And the fact that you just think, like I say, slightly unreal as well, because you think, my God, I've actually done it. What a set to do, I've actually done it. And no, it's just a fantastic feeling.
And the rainbow jersey obviously meant as much then as it meant now.
It does, yeah. And I think even with the Olympics, I think the rainbow jersey still means a massive amount, to cycling people. I think that's
so. What did it do for you then? A British world champion, very unusual thing. What did it do? Did it change your life? Did it bring any rewards?
Financially, no. Nothing. There was lots of interviews and things like that to start with, weren't there? And the immediate after effects. But no, because there was no financial rewards. You couldn't do any advertising. There was,
because you're an amateur.
You're an amateur. There's no advertising, and now you can cash in on that.
You got zero sponsorship, or nothing like
nothing.
that.
No, nothing at all.
You just stood out more in the local Club 10.
Yeah,
in your rainbow jersey.
And you got invited out. I mean, you got invited to obviously dinners and be guests of honours and things like that. And then there was a few television programmes I did and things like that, like Question of Sport. And
who were you on Question of Sport with?
I can't remember.
It's got to be on YouTube, surely.
Oh, it will probably be. Yeah,
look it up. And what about racing internationally? As I said earlier, the women's scene back then was pretty poor, but there were one or two things happening. There were the first sort of seeds of growth.
Yeah, there was, and there was things like the Tour de l'Ordre, which was a 5-day event, which came on later on, because I had a couple of years out, came back again, rode in 85, but I had an injury that I'd picked up. I'd picked it up probably in 83, I think, and couldn't get it diagnosed. But I mean, I didn't get it dealt with until 86, and eventually they realised it was a tear in my sheath. But it made riding the Tour de France incredibly painful because of the length of the climbs. So even though I was really fit and going well, and I was 3rd place overall, I ended up having to pull out.
This was 85, wasn't it?
That was 85.
So you didn't ride the first Tour in 84?
No, I didn't. No, I was having a year out.
But you went in 85.
Yeah.
And what were your impressions of that? Because it seemed at the time that it looked like a really good event with lots of potential. And I remember the way that it was organised, it was obviously coincided with the men's race, and the women were on the podium with the men in Paris, etc. But how did it feel like to be part of it?
It was fantastic. The atmosphere, and obviously because you've got the crowds that are there for the men as well, that was the thing that gave it the atmosphere. And it was brilliant what they used to do with us, because obviously we couldn't ride as many days because we were amateurs, and obviously couldn't ride the distances. So what we were doing was obviously finishing at the same place as the men, but they'd bus us in to nearer, so the night, so they say you'd overnight you'd bus into a hotel further down, and then so I remember seeing a lot of gutters and being on a lot of buses going around France.
A lot of travelling,
yeah. Because after the race we'd usually drive some distance, put us in a hotel somewhere, then the next morning have to drive again probably to the start. I think, and I know some of the women have said, oh, why can't they run the Women's Tour de France again with the men's? I think, to be honest with you, it was a logistical nightmare for them, because it meant they had to find more hotels, all the logistics of actually busing us round and so on and so forth. I can understand why they only did it for a little bit of time.
Did it feel, though, then that there was the start of a proper scene? I mean, there was a bit of momentum there for a few years. It seemed to die away again a bit in the 90s, but it certainly picked up again now.
Yes, it did. And I think they started to realise as well that obviously, like the World Championships, like I say, was 38, 40 mile, that actually we could ride a lot further than that. And then I remember riding the Giro and in the late 80s and like I said, the Tour de l'Aude, which was a 5-day race, and then the Giro, and the distances were like 110, 120 k's a day for a stage race. You know, it was 10 days. So gradually, at least the profile of women from that point of view, they realised actually we can put better races on because we know they can do the distances.
Did it annoy you that, that here were you, a British world champion, and you couldn't be a professional, you couldn't compete like the men could? Did that frustrate you?
Not particularly at the time, because I think there wasn't enough women to be a professional. If you wanted to turn professional, you couldn't have ridden the races. So to me, I'm very pragmatic.
You didn't really feel like you were missing out because it just...
didn't see the point in getting annoyed about something that wasn't there. At least if you wanted to ride as an amateur, you could still ride events and things, and there was enough things going on then. And of course, then the Olympics came into it. So although I wasn't riding in 84 and 88, when when ladies could ride the Olympics, I was riding in the early 90s, and I was going to the Olympics in 92, supposed to be. Then my back went.
So you never competed at the Olympics? Yeah, is that a regret?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, naffed off because my back went. And although I was treated very well, British Cycling sent me down to the Olympic Centre down in London. They had doctors and everybody looking at me and so on and so forth. I went to Leicestershire Rehabilitation Centre. But the problem is that it was getting to the point where we're getting nearer and near to the Olympics, and I hadn't done enough training. Even if they'd eventually, by the time they sort of said, right, you're okay now, you can... It would have been too late.
What happened in 84?
84, I just had a year out. I'd had enough. Because I think I'd concentrated so hard on actually winning the Worlds. Then I had to ride in 83, because if you see the interview of me, I say I'm not riding next year. Well, of course, I couldn't not ride as world champion. But I didn't do particularly well. So then I had 84 out.
And 88?
And 80... can't remember why 88. I had Sam in 86. I had the operation on my leg at end of 86. I rode again in 87. Can't remember why I didn't ride in 88.
When did you carry on racing until?
90. When I had to stop early in the season, in 92, when I had to pull out because my back I'd been out mountain biking, and I wouldn't mind. I was going fantastically well that winter because I was out with the lads on the mountain bike. We were out on the road bikes, and I was bloody flying, and I felt stronger than I had when I was 20, and I really felt. I'm thinking I've had a really good winter. I was absolutely chuffed. I was out on the mountain bike. Did nothing funny, was just putting my foot down, and my back just went like that. I had to crawl through the front door and I got home, couldn't move.
That was the end of your racing career.
Racing career.
If you look back in your career, what, obviously the world title would be the highlight. Any other highlights, any other races, experiences that you look back on with fondness?
The thing is, I enjoyed time trialling as well, you see. So some of the wins I had time trialling, I really liked. And winning the pursuit, doing the world record and then doing the hour record on the track. That was and I couldn't walk after that. They had to carry me off my bike.
The opportunities for women now are obviously still not on a par with the men, but there's a women's world tour, there are women's professional teams. Do you wish you were racing now?
Yes, in some ways I do. Yeah, the fact that there's actually some money in it as well, so you can, not that I'm avaricious, but at least you could have done it with support. And I think part of the thing about it is they get so much support from the fact that they've got physios and psychologists and so on and so forth. And that would have been a massive advantage. I mean, not just to me, to everybody. But at the end of the day, I rode when I did. We were all in the same boat. So, hey ho. But yes, I would love to have been riding now.
Would you be winning?
Of course. It's irrelevant, isn't it? Because I wouldn't be the age I am now, would I? I would be in my 20s, and yeah.
But you're riding your bike still. You said
Still
you're off to Mallorca soon to eat. So you ride a lot now, or?
I don't ride a massive amount, no, but I do try and keep fit. So we'll ride to work and back a few times, and then go out at the weekends, and I'll do 40 or 50 miles. Just to keep me ticking over, you know. And Mallorca is a holiday. I'm not going training.
Are you still competitive though on a bike?
Yeah. It never goes, that, does it? Never goes.
So Mallorca, you'll be out there riding the big climbs, and
it depends how fit I get. I might do, because it's a nice cake at the top. Go to the cafe.
Got your priorities right.
Yeah, you got to get your priorities right. Yeah.
Excellent. No, that's great. Do you know any of the women who race now, Lizzie or Armitstead or anybody like that?
I don't know them well.
Do you have any contact with them?
No, I don't. No,
do you think they know who you are and what you achieved?
Certainly, I've met Lizzie and spoken to Lizzie, so Lizzie does, but, you know, some of the younger girls don't. But you wouldn't expect them to. I mean, they weren't born, some of them, were they? It's a bit like, at least talking about Beryl in my day, Beryl was still around and still racing and still up there. So that's slightly different when somebody's visually there, I think. But I'm not involved in the cycling racing side, so the fact that girls don't know who I am doesn't, you know.
Nevertheless, for you, I mean, there's quite an elite club of, British riders who've achieved at that level. Yes. World Championship. Yeah. You know, Tom Simpson, yourself, Beryl Burton, Nicole Cook, Mark Cavendish. Now that there are more, it's a bigger club, but it must fill you with a lot of pride to be part of that. To be
part of that, yeah, it does, certainly, yeah. And I do get a lot of recognition from people who are probably my generation or slightly older, and who appreciate what you've done and what you've been through, to get there. They understand what you've been through to get there. So that's good, yeah.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.
So that was the quite remarkable, though she clearly doesn't realise it, Mandy Jones. And before that, we heard from Robin Morton, two really interesting people with really interesting stories from a different era in all senses, really. And I hope you've enjoyed that sort of slightly different episode of Cycling Podcast Féminin this month. We'll be back, won't we, Orla, with a conventional episode, I think, next month.
We will indeed.
What have we got planned?
I don't know. What do we have
I'm really
planned?
Putting you on the spot there.
We've got a whole host of wonderful surprises in store, so huge. Do not miss it.
It's going to be huge. But yeah, you enjoy hearing Mandy Jones there as well?
Loved it. I think it's really lovely to hear the stories of those who've come before us, and to remember how the sport's changed, to have a little look at that, because it puts into context where it is now as well. And I think sometimes with sports coverage in general, we get bogged down by results and form and training and whatever's in the news at the time. And I just love taking the time and speaking to people and hearing their backstories and hearing their journey through life and through the sport. I think it's just a privilege when we get to hear that and share that with them.
Indeed. Well, that's all for this month, as I said. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, thank you very much, Orla.
Thank you, Richard.
Just before we go this month, we do have some competition winners, as I mentioned earlier. Lots of you guessed that I serenaded Eileen Rowe with Come On Eileen, and lots of you also shared some of your favourite Cycling Podcast Féminin moments from the past year. Thank you very much for that. First, some winners of the WNT kit, including Eileen Rowe's signed British Champions gilet and Katie Archibald's World Champions kit. The winners of this stuff are Stephen D'Souza, Jonathan Smith and Mike Strasser. Please drop us a line with your addresses, Stephen, Jonathan and Mike. When Orla and I are together next month, we'll go through some of your feedback and pick some winners of the Pedalers de Charme t-shirts. I know we keep saying these are imminent, but we have been assured by Rapha that the female range of clothing will be available in early February. So we'll announce some winners, plural, of Pedalers de Charme t-shirts next month. Until then, thank you very much for listening.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.